You know, it never really dawned on me as a child that growing up, I had a weird issue with some games where I would never play them in order. Like, I would play them massively out of order. For example, growing up, I played Ratchet & Clank free when I first got my PlayStation 2. A few years after that, I finally played the first Ratchet & Clank. And I finally got around to playing Ratchet & Clank 2 only a few years ago. The exact same thing applies to SSX, but in a much stronger sense. I've spent the last 13 years of my life playing SSX Tricky without a care in the world, and now I'm only getting around to playing SSX free. I'm not proud of saying that, but hey, here we are 12 years after I first played Tricky. The main reasons I've never played SSX free growing up was because I could never find a copy, and also because I had SSX Tricky, so I was never really too eager to pick the game up. But after years of not playing it, I finally got around to it. To briefly explain what this game is, SSX Free was the third game in the SSX series, and was produced by EA Sports Big. And the more I talk about any of Big's projects, the more depressed I become knowing that the studio has since shut down. This game, unlike SSX Tricky, was not a remake of the previous title, and instead was its own unique game, featuring all new tracks, characters, tricks, and a whole bunch of other unique features that were really impressive at the time. This game has had a lot going for it over the last few years, and personally, I see it as one of the most ambitious SSX games, if not the most ambitious SSX game in the entire series. However, while this game is ambitious, and that ambition has resulted in my opinion, some of the best design decisions the series has ever seen, it's also resulted in some of the most baffling, but I'll talk more about that later. This game's production began only mere months after the release of SSX Tricky, and according to the developers in their interviews, they wanted to try a brand new open mountain style that they tried to implement in the original SSX, but ultimately decided against it, instead opting to turn that idea into its own dedicated track, which you might know as Untracked. You learn something new every day, I guess. With the experience of developing the first two SSX games and having a better grasp on how far they could push the engine, EA Sports Big decided to finally bring the open mountain idea they had from the original game to life and finally flesh it out. They really wanted to go all out and stick to the mountain theme they had originally envisioned. Hell, that theme was all over the game's marketing. It was all over the trailers, the billboards, hell, even the intro. They decided to make this game's pacing and design all revolve around the mountain, and make it feel more like an actual snowboarding event. But it's tricky. The budget got improved across the board, the graphics got improved across the board, and the hype for the game was even bigger than that of the original, or even Tricky. Aside from that, I wasn't able to find much on the game's development, but now that we're all caught up, let's talk about SSX Free. Before we get into what I liked about SSX Free, I need everyone watching to remember that I loved SSX Tricky growing up. So much so, I consider it one of my favorite games of all time, and for a while I considered it my favorite game of all time. Of course, opinions change, but it's still in my top 5 for sure. SSX Free expands heavily upon the gameplay of Tricky, and has some pretty big shoes to fill, so just keep that in mind, cause I'm gonna be comparing this game to Tricky a lot in this video, so just be prepared to hear me say Tricky a lot. One of the first major changes you'll notice upon booting up the game is that the World Circuit mode is now gone, instead being replaced with Conquer the Mountain, an entirely new game mode that is meant to show off the large mountain this game takes place on, and you'll quickly see it actually does that really well. This mode takes an entirely different approach from the other games. Whereas in the other games you'd race on several tracks that were spread all across the globe, the whole game takes place on one mountain, which is split up into 3 peaks, all of which have their own unique tracks and environments to explore. Not just that, but because you can explore the whole mountain once you unlock it, you can actually start at the very top of the mountain once you unlock the Peak Free Pass and race from the top all the way to the bottom of Peak 1, which is really impressive considering this was the first time the SSX series had ever tried something like this, and it works surprisingly well. Having to actually ride from area to area rather than just picking the event from a list actually makes the mountain feel like an actual place. The progression works like this. You start off on Peak 1, which is at the bottom of the mountain. As you complete challenges and earn medals, you unlock more and more sections of the mountain and can eventually unlock more peaks. Then, you can finally reach Peak 3, which is all the way at the top. As I said earlier, you can race all the way from the top of the mountain to the bottom, but the insane part about this is that there are no loading times, as the entire mountain is loaded at once. This means that any time you go into a race, or any time you explore the mountain, the whole thing's being rendered at once. And considering that this game loads incredibly quickly, that is impressive, given that this is a PS2 game. And this exact idea was attempted previously and didn't work out for EA. So for them to try this, and for them to get it to work as well as it did, is amazing. Yeah, there was actually a time where EA cared about making sure their games functioned. Not only did the World Circuit mode get an overhaul, but so did the announcer. While we did lose the legendary voice of DJ Rozelle, we got DJ Atomica instead. Atomica is kind of one of the faces of the series, despite the fact we never get to see the damn thing. Aside from this one really low quality JPEG. Like, am I supposed to be looking at Atomica or a goddamn Da Vinci painting? DJ Atomica injects some much needed life into the mountain. He runs the radio station on the mountain and plays the songs from the game's soundtrack as you race around them. Not just that, but he'll rattle off some random news stories that occur around the mountain in between levels, making it seem as though time is actually passing as you make your way up the mountain. It's the little things like this that really makes the mountain feel like not just a hub for the races, but an actual place that you can explore. He may not be the best background character, but he makes the mountain feel more like an actual place where people would live and go about their daily lives. Speaking of the soundtrack, it's an absolute blast top to bottom. I can't recall a single track I didn't enjoy, and all of them are catchy, memorable, and get you in the mood to race, as well as send your adrenaline levels through the roof if they play during the right circumstances. Another major thing that SSX Tricky improves on is the customization. In SSX Tricky, the customization was really limited and practically bare bones. All you could do was change your board or change your outfit. In SSX Free, however, you can now customize practically anything about your character. You can give them hats, glasses, new haircuts, pants, change their board, and everything in between. Not just that, but you can even play as every character from the previous two games. Unfortunately, they just act as alternate skins for the rider you're playing as and don't even get their own voice lines, which is kinda sad. I can understand why this was done, because copyright and contract licensing and stuff like that, but it's weird not being able to hear characters like Luther, JP, or Eddie speak. Well, at least Eddie got one last ride before they bastardized him in the 2012 game. But getting back to the good stuff, you can now manually equip what uber trick your rider can pull off. Don't like a specific move your rider uses? Just unequip it and choose a new one. This allows you to make the rider you play as feel more like your rider rather than a preset template the game gives you access to. It's just really neat. Speaking of Uber, the Uber system from Tricky has been brought back and it has been significantly upgraded. In SSX Tricky, it was incredibly easy to win a race, as all you had to do was hit 6 Ubers and speed down the mountain with your unlimited boost. In SSX Free, they completely overhaul the Uber trick system. Now you need to land 9 separate Uber tricks in order to fill up your new Super Uber meter and get the unlimited boost. At the start of the race, you start at Uber Zone 1, as the game refers to it as, and can only do very quick and simple tricks. Once you spell Super on the Super Uber meter, you enter Uber Zone 2, where you can start doing your preset Uber tricks. And once you spell Super Uber, you enter Uber Zone 3 and can finally use your unlimited boost. And this time, The boost only lasts for a set period of time before the meter drains and you need to start from Uber Zone 2. This balances the boost mechanic and makes races a little bit more challenging, as the AI now has time to catch up to you unless you're constantly roaring down the track at a breakneck pace. And just when you think the Uber system can't get any more crazy, they also added Uber tricks you can only perform while on a grind rail. It's a little thing, but it allows you to perform some absolutely ridiculous combos. Plus, watching a steaming robot do a handstand is just fucking brilliant. Speaking of the gameplay, the overall controls for this game feel very good when compared to Tricky. Tricky had very light and floaty controls that were pretty responsive. And SSX Free isn't quite the same, but it still has a very similar level of polish. Your rider in this game feels a lot heavier than they did in Tricky, and makes you feel like your rider is actually struggling to fight against the laws of physics to perform these over-the-top tricks. When they spin, you can feel them try to shift their weight and keep the momentum going. When they punch someone, you can see them reel back and bop another rider in the nose with enough strength behind it to make Omni-Man proud. Everything in this game feels tighter and smoother, which makes the gameplay feel even more buttery smooth than Tricky at times. Another thing that has been massively improved since Tricky is the AI. The AI in this game has been absolutely jacked up in terms of difficulty when compared to Tricky. In Tricky, I rarely felt as though the AI ever got close to passing me out in a race. In SSX Free, they are constantly catching up to me, and in later races, they remove their Dragon Ball Z style training weights and barrel down the mountain at an insane rate. They start to use shortcuts, shove down anyone that gets near them, and can seemingly pass you on a moment's notice. In Tricky, I was never worried I was going to lose. In SSX Free, I'm constantly paying attention to where the other riders are for fear that they'll pass me. It's not frustratingly hard though, but it's not embarrassingly easy. It hits that sweet spot right in the middle, and I love it. Another thing that SSX Free has over Tricky is the sheer amount of stuff you can do within the game. Not only do you have standard races, you also have the returning show-off mode, which has been expanded upon in massive ways. All show-off events now have their very own dedicated track and are split up into 3 different types of events. You have slopestyle events, which see you board down a massive track built just for doing tricks. Think of Pipe Dream from SSX Tricky, but every single type of show-off event has their own version of it. You have Big Air, which sees you jump off a series of massive ramps, and finally, Super Pipe, where you hop into a massive half pipe and have to try to rack up your score as fast as you can before you reach the end of the pipe. All these takes on the classic style of show-off are very unique and all showcase their own unique parts of the game, but it does also create its own problem, which I'll get into later. Another little gameplay addition that I like, which I wasn't really able to capture footage of, but is an actual thing, is the character hitboxes. All the hitboxes are actually adjusted depending on the character's height. Characters like Mac and Allegra are of average height and are perfect for beginners. They're okay at grabbing collectibles, and they rarely have any trouble navigating tight environments. Characters like Simon and Nate, on the other hand, are incredibly tall and are perfect for grabbing collectibles. However, they are also excellent at crashing into things due to their taller and wider hitboxes. It also makes the characters feel a lot more unique, as they all actually feel different to race as. You've got characters that are smaller and more nimble, and then you've got characters that are bigger, tougher to knock down, but a bit more clumsy. I'm aware they did a similar thing in Tricky, but it was a lot less obvious in that game than it is here. So props off to EA for just focusing on the little things at times. Now that we're done gushing about the game, which, believe me, is a very hard thing to do, let's get into the things I'm not a big fan of. Because believe me, as much as I love this game, and as much as I think it improves over a lot that Tricky did, it's got some problems that I don't think enough people talk about. First of all, the new characters. Listen, I'm aware I'm in the minority here, but I don't really find any of them to be memorable, and most of them just come off as annoying inclusions. Allegra is a tomboy and is named after an allergy cream. Griff is an annoying 12-year-old who somehow convinced his parents to let him compete in Life or Death, the snowboarding tournament. Vigo is accurately described in the game as 20 pounds of cool in a 5-pound bucket, which try to make what that statement means in your mind. And finally, you have Nate, who is just kind of there, if I'm honest. None of them are particularly bad characters, and I don't find myself getting frustrated whenever I see their faces. But I just found them unmemorable, to the point where I had to look up what their names were for the script. Hell, I didn't even realize that the Griff in this game is the same one from the 2012 game. I just thought they had another character named Griff. Like, seriously, look at these two and tell me if there's a resemblance. Now, if you see a resemblance, go talk to your therapist. Not just that, but the personalities of the other characters have been severely toned down in this game. The thing that made characters like Moby, Simon, and Eddie so memorable and tricky was their exaggerated personalities and their voice actors, the way they moved and the way they interacted with others. It really brought the characters to life, and it made playing as them exhilarating. Whenever they did something, you felt their excitement, and it got you even more hyped up to race. Unfortunately, not only have they been toned down significantly, they also changed a lot of the voice actors, and the characters don't feel as fun as a result. Don't get me wrong, I still think the replacement actors do a great job, but it's just those things that just make the game feel less wacky than Tricky did, if you can understand what I mean by that. The exact same thing also applies to the racetracks. In SSX Tricky, all the tracks took place in different parts of the world, meaning that the game designers could really go all out with what they wanted to do. You've got iced over cities, you've got canyons, pinball machines, you've got an iceberg in the middle of Hawaii. You've got so much to work with. But in SSX Free, you're confined to one mountain, meaning you can only really come up with slight variations from snow, trees, and more snow. Don't get me wrong, the tracks in this game are actually designed very well. There's a lot more inventive shortcuts, there's a lot more twists and turns, there's a lot more open and free areas where pretty much go do whatever the hell you want, and there's even entire bits where you can completely just cut off from the pack and just go your own direction and pretty much just forget about them for 2 minutes. But when compared to Tricky, they lack coloring, atmosphere, and the personality just isn't there like it was in Tricky. Don't get me wrong, the tracks are still fun to race on. They just aren't as colorful or unique in terms of how they look when they were compared to Tricky, if you get what I mean. Another major problem that I talked about in my SSX Tricky review that has been carried over to this game is the medal system, which it works exactly the same as it did in Tricky. You can come first place in the first 2 races, and then completely fuck up on the third and have to restart all 3. It was a simple issue they could have fixed by simply adding a point system like in most racing games, but they didn't for some reason. This is especially annoying when you consider that in this game, the AI is jacked up the wall and as a result, can easily outpace you in some of the later levels. Take the final track in the game, Gravitude for instance. If you slip up on this track, even once, the AI slips off down the track, and unless you race almost flawlessly, you will never be able to get a gold medal. Not only has this system not been fixed, it's been brought over to show off for whatever reason.
But why? Why would you do that? Why would you do any of that?
Like in the races, you can do well the first time going or down the track, but if you miss a point multiplier or drop a combo, you've essentially lost and have to retry the whole thing all over again. Another thing I'm not a big fan of is that you can't do show-off on the main tracks anymore. Well, not by conventional means anyway. One thing I loved about SSX Tricky was the feeling of mastering each track. You'd race on a track 3 times, then go around a 4th time and use your knowledge from the first 3 races to hit the sickest tricks that these 2D rendered crowds have ever seen. Not just that, but every single racetrack was changed slightly with the additions of extra ramps and grind rails to make the track feel slightly different. They basically took the standard races and made them feel more like a pinball machine. No, not that pinball machine. A different kind of pinball machine. You felt as though you were actually mastering each track by racing on it in two completely different ways. Here, you race on a standard track 3 times, then you race on a completely unrelated show-off track twice, and try to get the best score with about half the preparation. The only way to even do a show-off event on the actual racetracks is to participate in the all-peak show-off event, which you don't get access to until the end of the game. Not just that, but you have to race from the top of the mountain to the bottom in one go, try to beat the top score, and get to the bottom before the timer runs out. The fact I can't just go into the race menu and pick to do a show-off on Metro City is just really, really dumb. Like, come on, I can do it in Tricky, so why can't I do it here? Listen, I don't mind the new show-off exclusive tracks, as I've mentioned earlier, I think they're all well designed and fun to race on, and are very unique takes on what is admittedly a very interesting idea. But the fact still stands that an essential part of what made playing SSX fun is completely lost in this third game, which really disappointed me. Don't get me wrong, the racing, still fantastic. The unique show-off tracks, on their own, a fun inclusion. I just really wish that you could play show-off on the racetracks. Maybe not in Conquer the Mountain, but maybe if you just wanted to mess around and try to do show-off in maybe just a single-player race. Maybe just multiplayer. Just anything, man. I just love to do tricks. But, in fairness, the devs did try to make up for this by including something else entirely. Something else to keep the player racing on the same tracks over and over again. The Platinum Medals.
Oh, hell no!
These platinum medals are the devil incarnate, and the reason I almost shattered several controllers. And at one point, my own jaw. In order to obtain these platinum medals, you need to secure a fast enough time in the races and a high enough score in the show-off events. It sounds simple on paper, just do a lot better than you would normally. But then you actually try it and realize that you need to literally play flawlessly if you want any hope of getting even one of these. Some of them are admittedly a lot easier than others, such as Metro City, mainly due to the fact that I discovered this phone move shortcut that lets you skip like 30 seconds ahead on the track. And then you have tracks like Kicked Out and Snow Jam, tracks that ask for so much perfection that I'd rather slam my balls into a waffle iron than get a platinum on either of these tracks ever again. You need to play flawlessly. And when I say flawlessly, I mean flawlessly. If you slip up or crash even once, you may as well just click restart, because now you're gonna miss the slim window to get the platinum. And what's even worse is that if you're doing this in Conquer the Mountain, you need to get the platinum time specifically on the third race. If you get the platinum time or the score before you reach your third and final race, congratulations, because you just wasted your time and have to do it all over again because it doesn't count. These times rank only below the dev times in Crash Team Racing Nitro Fueled in terms of how much I had to retry them. Only for the fact that in that game, you need to make a sacrifice to the pagan gods and sell your free will to Activision if you want any hope of obtaining even one of the damn things. Here, in SSX 3, you just need to endure pain. A lot of pain. And in the end, I got them all. Every last one on both the show-off and racetracks. Was it worth it? Nope. Will I ever do it again? Unfortunately, yes, for my Let's Play series. Did it feel good to finally get them all? Oddly enough, yeah, it did. As frustrating as it was to get all of these platinums, you can actually feel yourself get better the more and more you try. You slowly feel like you're actually conquering the tracks. You're learning them, analyzing them, looking for the best routes. I was actually finding myself just going around the tracks, not even trying to do tricks or race, and thinking to myself, maybe if I go this way or hop off that rail, maybe I can get over there faster. Or maybe if I cut through this tree line, I can get up here without having to waste any time. That is the only good thing about these Platinums. They make you think. But then again, you'd probably have to do a lot of thinking after you realize you've broken your third controller in a row because you can't get the one on Snow Jump. Jesus fucking Christ. Overall, I'd say SSX Free is a fantastic entry in the franchise, and one I personally find myself coming back to constantly. I'm not gonna lie, I felt like I was gonna walk into this game and say to myself, it's not tricky, I'm going back to it. But genuinely, I find myself coming back to this game more than tricky. It does have a few rough edges, don't get me wrong, there are some things in here that make absolutely no sense. But it is still a fantastic game in the SSX series, and would be, in my opinion, the last good SSX game. After the release of SSX Free, EA Sports Big went on to make SSX On Tour, a game which got a very polarizing reception. Lots of people thought it was awesome, lots of people thought it was horrible. Then EA went and made a Wii exclusive game titled SSX Blur, which just served as a weird remake of Free and On Tour, but it had motion controls. Then they tried to reboot the series in SSX 2012 and... Okay, listen. When I get an Elgato, which will be happening soon, I will review SSX. But just know, I am going to be ranting and raving about that game, okay? There is a reason I said they absolutely bastardized Eddie the last time I talked about it. So, thank you all so much for watching this video on SSX Free. If you enjoyed this video, don't forget to like, share, comment, and subscribe. And join me next time for when I decide to review something else. It's been like, what, 7 months since my last review? I really gotta get a convenient video schedule lined up. And after getting the Platinums, I'm probably gonna need a therapist as well. I need help.